Good morning. My name is Janie Montblanc, and on behalf of the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange and our partners, I would like to welcome you to this webinar titled Engaging Communities in Sagebrush Restoration, Idaho Fish and Game Southwest Region Volunteer Program, presented by Michael Young with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. Before I introduce our speaker, I will go over some webinar details. If you have questions or comments for the speaker or me, please type them into the questions box of your control panel located at the top right of your screen at any time during the webinar. I will field your questions to the speaker after the presentation. I also want to let you know that whatever you do in your control panel does not affect the webinar, so you're welcome to type a test message or test your audio at any time during the webinar. If you're having problems with your audio, please open your audio box and check your audio selections. Now I would like to introduce our presenter. Michael Young is the Volunteer Coordinator and Habitat Restoration Coordinator with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game Southwest Region Volunteer Center in Garden City, Idaho. Michael has lived in Idaho all of his life and is passionate about the landscapes that he grew up exploring. He graduated in 2002 from Northwest Nazarene University with a bachelor's degree in biology. He has worked for the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station and has been part of the Idaho Fish and Game Volunteer Habitat Program for 12 years now, where sagebrush restoration has been a focal point of his job. Michael's passion to educate and get regular people excited about native landscapes is apparent in his work and play. Welcome, Michael, and thank you for presenting today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate Janie and the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange for letting us kind of showcase what's going on in Southwest Idaho here. And I think, Janie, we're going to get here to my screen now. Here we go.
Yeah.
All right. There we go. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, I can see it. And I'm going to mute myself because people are talking outside my office.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'll just get started here. So once again, thanks for having me. The Idaho Fish and Game Volunteer Habitat Program, we've been in existence since about 1990, doing things like engaging the community in sagebrush restoration. I joined in with this program in 2005, and I've started kind of part-time and then worked my way into leading the program now. And I think what I'd really like to showcase today is what makes this program so neat. So I'd like to talk about kind of the alternative ways to get things done as far as a land management agency goes, and then also kind of talk about the niche and the neat way that we fit in with the restoration community and things that are going on in the Intermountain West. So I will just get started here. So when we're recruiting volunteers to be part of our program, there's a whole lot of reasons why they might come along, and this is just pulled straight from our website. You can see the URL up there in the top right. And to have volunteers join in and be part of a program, they really need to feel like they're involved and they fit. And so what you see on the screen there is some ways that maybe volunteers might see that and maybe this would help draw them in and get them involved. I think a lot of what I find to be the most important part of our program is that we provide hands-on education, and we're making friends and supporters of not only our agency, but of all the agencies that are involved and all the ecological issues that are facing the Intermountain West. And so, so I'm showing you here, this was taken from this summer, the mile marker 14 fire. There's a big need for fire restoration in Southwest Idaho, perhaps even more than most of the Intermountain West. If you look at some of the fire history maps that you might have seen, Southwest Idaho is kind of the hotspot right now for fires, and it has been for 50+ years. And a lot of that has to do with what's going on the land. And so Boise is kind of in the heart of that, and Boise residents have started to learn that it's really becoming a problem out there. And that's part of how we fit in with all this, is we really try to teach the public what's going on. So again, this was at the Boise River WMA, 70-foot flames in cases, and most of this landscape is a sagebrush landscape, like the lower mountain sagebrush zone. There's just a few ponderosas there in that photo. And then this is right there in that same area. This is what it looks like after a fire. You can see the need for some restoration. And I don't know if you can notice where that smoke is flaming there. There's some little pink patches, and those pink patches are cheatgrass in the understory, and that's a large part of why we have to do restoration in Southwest Idaho. So just kind of show you what landscapes we're working in. This is a Lucky Peak site before a fire. This is a nice big stand of bitterbrush that we actually use to collect our bitterbrush seed. And then if you notice around the lake there, kind of all that pink color, that's all cheatgrass that's coming up in that grass photo. So when volunteers get involved and come out, and when we have students, we really try to teach them what's going on and why, when we're driving by a site that just looks like a beautiful, hey, this is Idaho, why maybe the more you know about it, the more you understand that what you're seeing out your car window isn't what it should look like in Idaho. So it's a lot of need for restoration. And then this is a really awesome picture that Carrie Papani took after the Soda Fire. And it just kind of shows you the stark difference between where the fire line there, as you can see the sagebrush in the distance there. So in order to engage volunteers and the public, we really have to promote the importance of what we're doing and why. You won't really get volunteers to stick around very long if they don't know and they're not connected and feeling like they're doing something important for the community. And so this slide is taken from something that we would show some of our students that get involved. The importance of what we're doing, and sage grouse has become kind of #1 on that list. You see at the top there. As well as at Fish and Game, we really care about wintering big game herds, which we have a lot of that coming off the mountains of central Idaho into the kind of that mountain desert interface where Boise is. So this is what it looks like this winter up there on the Boise River WMA. You can see those deer are fighting to survive. And we show these same kind of photos to volunteers that are interested in getting involved. You can see those bitterbrush plants are very browse back, and at this time of year that is really the only food available for them, especially this year where we have very deep old snowpack and it's very crusty all over. And so these shrubs that we plant in this program are kind of the only thing that wildlife has in the winter. And there it is, it's all about the habitat. You see the huge base of big sagebrush. I love that photo. You could be walking by on the other side of these and never even see those deer, so it makes me really excited to see good habitat like that. And volunteers make a huge difference. This was taken out of Sodafire site. You can see the drill lines in the foreground. Volunteers came back in and seeded sagebrush because the state lands only had so much money to have sagebrush in their mix or to obtain the sagebrush seed. So we went out. This is at Jump Creek just outside of Boise and Marsing kind of country to the west of us, and we went out and seeded sagebrush. So we were the reason why sagebrush got onto that landscape. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about kind of how the volunteer program is put together and how I think if someone out there that's listening would like to, if they would like to start a program, maybe just kind of the ways it works and how that all works together. So we have, I would say, since I started in this program in 2005, the need for students, or the students in their programs, they have to volunteer or have some form of service learning to graduate from almost any school. I mean, we're talking even back into the elementary schools now, and especially junior high, high school, and college. Students have to do some sort of service hour. But not only that, it kind of comes from a larger sense of volunteerism that seems to be growing in our community. So you see, like on the second bullet point, church groups and meetup clubs. Like, obviously those groups, you don't have to volunteer to do anything, but it's a greater sense of volunteerism that's growing, and I think that's why the student push has grown so much too. So I'm going to venture to say that in your communities, there are people that are looking to volunteer. They just need to find a good spot to do it. It's really cool. Some of the relationships we've built with our schools. You can see Bora High School, Weiser High, Payette, Emmett, Sage International School, and Northwest Lineman College. Those have been long-term relationships where, for example, some of the Bora High School students, we know them by name, and they come out on project after project. And Northwest Lineman College is a really large school. There's only so many of those lineman schools throughout the United States, and so we can have sometimes 125 able-bodied young folks coming out and volunteering on projects. We also work closely with Mountain Home Air Force Base, and anytime we're doing something that's down more in that region, we can really get people involved and sometimes have a huge crew come out. So let's see. This is just an example of kind of what we've been able to accomplish in Southwest Idaho. This is kind of an estimate for 2016 since we just finished that calendar year. But we know we had over 1,500 total volunteers participate in our habitat program in 2016. And that includes all these individual volunteers and groups, and then also landowners. We oftentimes are working on private land, which is something unique for state agencies versus federal, is how much we can work on private land. And it's nice to have them out. You can see we had over 20,000 volunteer hours. And this last group of people I wanted to mention, our regular volunteers, is something that really sets our program apart, and is those regular people that are like-minded and interested in what we're doing. They're the reason why we're able to have a strong community of volunteers and to have successful projects. And what they do is they come out, these are people that are just like you and I that might be interested in our own passions, and we just get involved and go out. And they come on multiple projects, and they come over multiple years, and they've learned to be crew leaders for our planting projects. They've learned to support anything that's going on. In fact, they often remind me things that I forget, which is really nice to have. And like I said, they donate sometimes dozens of hours and sometimes over 300 hours a year, some of these volunteers. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about how those regulars help. And in building this group, we also have started social events. So we have a volunteer banquet each year. We had a holiday get-together where we went out for drinks. And one winter we had an Aldo Leopold movie night where we had about 50 people from the community come and watch Green Fire, which is really cool. And our partnerships are what makes this possible. So I can't stress enough how much BLM has been involved. Dude, I need to move this, by the way. I just realized that. Okay. BLM has provided a challenge cost share funding opportunity for Fish and Game for about 20 years now. And they provide money for a part-time volunteer coordinator, as well as funding for snacks, buses, tools, and supplies. So just about any time we are lacking funds at Fish and Game, we can dig into that challenge cost share account. And BLM has supported that. Now, some of you might know that challenge cost share is fading from funding for this next couple years at least, and possibly longer. But BLM has, the local BLM office has agreed to continue to fund us through other mechanisms. So we're really appreciative of that. And that's led to an enhanced collaboration lately with BLM state operations. We're working much more closely with fire rehab that the BLM is doing, and we've really been able to work hand in hand. I'm actually going to talk about specific examples of that here in a minute. We also work with Idaho Department of Lands, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Lucky Peak Nursery, which I have a whole section in there. And recently, the Institute for Applied Ecology has been growing sagebrush forests in their Sagebrush in Prisons project. And last year was actually the first year I was directly involved in that. And that was a huge benefit. And if you ever have a chance to work with applied ecology, those are some great plants that the prisoners are growing. And this is just to highlight the need for restoration and the skinny deer on winter range, you know. So this is what makes our program unique, and really where our niche is we have a full circle program. And what I mean by that is we collect the plant material, we select the site, the plant material is well adapted, and then we see that to grow out and then fruition of actually planting or seeding on the landscape, which really brings local site-adapted material, which is very important with sagebrush and some other different species out there. And it's so unique that, I mean, I don't know of anybody that is getting site material that is sometimes literally feet away from the restoration site. And that's really important. And one prime example I have of that is, you see it, that third bullet point, the BLM Soda Fire. So after the Soda Fire burned, I'd never seen as much response from BLM for a fire rehab project ever. And the public got involved with that. We had more involvement from the west end of the Treasure Valley than ever before. And I knew we were going to need seed material. We didn't necessarily have a targeted, let's go out and get this seed for this project, but that fall, it was like, we're going to collect seed, we're going to get volunteers out there and use that local community enthusiasm. We had people calling, wanting to get involved with the Soda Fire, and I said, let's go out and collect seed, we're going to need it, I know we are. And so we ran out and collected Wyoming sagebrush seed. We got a permit from the BLM, and production was not great that year, which is kind of often the case with Wyoming. And we were probably even slightly late when we collected it, but we had 2 really large days where we had over 100 volunteers out collecting seed, and we collected about 1,000 pounds. And then as winter approached, we weren't sure what we were going to do with it. I was starting to brainstorm. We had all these clean bags of seed, and we were going to maybe find some sites to broadcast on state land. And then BLM called and said, Michael, do you have any local seed? We need a seed source for a grow out. And you can see that last bullet point. They requested 450,000 seeds, and Lucky Peak was able to grow 625,000 plants for that grow out, which are going to be, BLM's going to be pulling their hair out trying to get all those plants in this spring, since this fall was not conducive to planting. But that's just like one example of the way our Fish and Game Volunteer Program can provide local native materials, not just for our agency, but for all of our partners too. And so we're going to talk about, this is our circle. So seed collection. We're out here with Sage International School on a couple of these photos, and then you see a woman from the community collecting bitterbrush seed. Again, so the Sage International project there, that's in conjunction with BLM gaining some seed for the Snake River Birds of Prey restoration activities that have occurred there. In order to, I'll go back to this slide, in order to do a project, and so I'm trying to put this together. How we mentioned before that in order to have a vibrant program, you have to engage volunteers. You have to make them feel like their time was valuable. You have to show what the importance of the project is. You also have to have a well-designed, well-thought-out project. So I was mentioning that communities and schools, everybody's looking to volunteer nowadays, but they need a place to do it. And if they come to your project once and they stand around and they show up and they don't feel like they contributed, they're probably going to look elsewhere. And so ways that we make sure projects happen is we're well organized and efficient. Volunteers aren't standing around. And then on each time we go out on the site, you see the group gathered in the top left there. We stop and talk to them and tell them, hey, this is why we're out here. This is how it works for wildlife. And you relate it to the group that you have out on the hill. So if they're interested in the jackrabbits that are jumping around, you talk about the jackrabbits jumping around. And you don't pass on those opportunities to connect it to the group that you're working with. And then you also have to find that happy medium, or that line between not enough and too much work. And different groups have different opinions on that. And that can be a real challenge when performing volunteer projects is you think you got the right amount of plants, but you got out there and you have 1,000 too many, and now what are you going to do? And you kind of always have to have a little bit of a backup in case you've got a group of people out there that 2 hours was plenty of work for them. But as we've gone along through this process, I've learned a lot about how many plants and how to expect and what to bring for each day. So We also collect bitterbrush seed. I like this photo because it shows how beautiful bitterbrush is. And in Idaho, if you've never been to Idaho, look at that bitterbrush there on the left. You've got to come see bitterbrush in Idaho because it gets huge here compared to some parts of the West. I know I gave a talk like this in Colorado or at the Native Seed Conference in New Mexico, and nobody had ever seen bitterbrush that big before. But come out and collect bitterbrush seed with us if you want to learn how to do this. We're having a good time here. With sagebrush seed collection, we collect all different subspecies based on the need, and you'd be surprised at how well you can learn sagebrush if you're actively collecting it each fall and trying to get different materials for different sites. So, and volunteers have also learned to do that. So there's probably some of our volunteers are probably better at identifying sagebrush than many of the people that work at our local or our land management agencies. So, and not only can you learn to differentiate it by sight, but you can also learn to differentiate it by smell. This is a mountain big sagebrush right here in front of us, and obviously that many of you know that's the sweetest smelling, nicest smelling plant versus some of that basin big sage, which I don't even like to be around because it irritates my sinuses and it doesn't smell good. So again, trying to find that line of what your volunteers can do. Here's out in the snow. It's quite often snowy when we collect sagebrush seed, especially mountain sagebrush. This is a group of probably mostly BSU students up on Bogus Basin Road. And that's kind of what our bounty looks like. On any given year, we collect probably 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of that. Our biggest year, we've collected 3,000 pounds in 2007, which was the year of the Murphy Complex fire, and Governor Otter challenged Idahoans 1,000 Idahoans to come out and collect sagebrush seed. And we did reach that number, and Governor Otter himself came out that year and collected a nice big hopper of seed before he decided he had to go do his other governor duties. So when we're out collecting, this is with Weiser High School, and there's different ways to motivate volunteers. These students have to collect as much weight as their teacher does in order to get their grade. So you can see this kid weighing his sagebrush on a scale, and the teacher does give a little bit of leniency that they don't know about, but typically it's a pretty fun process, and watching some of the tricks that maybe the high school students find, like making sure they're collecting the flower stalks or adding snow or sometimes rocks into their seed bags. So, but you know, we catch them. So this is I wanted to kind of give like a specific example of kind of that niche we fit, like I talked about collecting seeds. So this is a Sodafire example. Here's you can't really see all the volunteers, but if you look into the back there, there's volunteers strewn about for a mile there. And we collected 1,500 pounds of sagebrush seed for Sodafire. And then with that seed, like I mentioned, BLM grew lots of seedlings. We also seeded the Cow Creek sage grouse lek and seeded Jump Creek. Both of those areas were not going to receive seed on state lands. And then we also seeded Cow Creek with seed that we had collected from the previous fall. So this is kind of a busy map, but it's really great. Carrie Papani put it together just today. And it kind of shows that niche again. So if you look in that top right, you'll see Boise, and you see down towards Jordan Valley, there's two purple dots, and that's kind of where these two restoration sites are. And we've got sage grouse leks marked there in green, and you can see the different land use, land management, state lands being the blue there. And so BLM went out after Sodafire here, and they did more restoration work, like I said, than about any fire I've ever seen. And in some cases, the state of Idaho joined up with that, and some of those sections got the BLM treatment, and the state paid for it. And in other cases, the state did its own treatments and didn't necessarily have all the resources that the feds did to rehab this. So you can see in that kind of bottom middle is the Cow Creek sage grouse lek, and that's the green dot there. And then you can see where we actually hand planted, and then where we seeded all around the lek, kind of in the brooding areas. And then up in that top left corner, you see that little black polygon there, and that's where we planted the coal mine basin sage grouse lek. Again, that you see other leks there on private and BLM ground. The BLM ground ones have been rehabbed by BLM, and that state land section would not have been done if it weren't for our program. So again, I just love the use of volunteers and the way we get things done that wouldn't be done otherwise for wildlife and for our landscapes. And see, that's what we do. That's why we do it. That's actually a dusky grouse nest in mountain sage, but it's a beautiful photo of why sage grouse is so important, or sagebrush. So sagebrush seeding is part of this circle. So there's times when our seed makes it to grow out, and other times when we just go and do specific kind of smaller scale projects, maybe when funding wasn't available or when something wouldn't have got done is often the case. So this is the Lucky Fire by Lucky Peak Reservoir. It burned right where we have a new wildlife underpass under State Highway 21, and we were really concerned about the amount of erosion that would be coming down into that area, into the underpass area, as well as the water drainage. And so you can see these hardcore volunteers going up these slopes, and they're throwing sagebrush seed. And for some of you, I don't know if Joe Weldon's attached today, but that's him in that foreground there. He works for BLM here in Idaho. So that we went on a really cold day, and we went out and spread sagebrush seed. It was about 0 that morning, and again, those deer were using those plants like I showed in those first few slides. We could see them driving up the highway under every single bitterbrush shrub in some places. So that's what it looks like what we're throwing. So this has been cleaned by the Lucky Peak Nursery, cleaned to about 20% purity. And it's good to have that, because if you had pure seed, you'd have to use tweezers to make sure you weren't spreading it too thick. And this is what it looks like on the landscape. So this is actually kind of a heavier rate of seed. We've kind of learned to fine-tune how much we're throwing on the ground, and you'll see some photos here of what I mean by that. So this was just the spring after a seeding project. You see all those little sagebrush seedlings. In some cases, there were probably 10,000 sagebrush seedlings over a 10 square meter area. But those plants thin themselves out. You can see this photo taken the second fall after seeding, and in a place where we probably had 1,000 plants, now we only have a couple hundred, and these continue to thin themselves out. And then maybe this is a little better seeding rate. You see in the top, we have 2 sagebrush plants, and that's kind of, again, through experience, we kind of figured out when you're throwing sagebrush seed by hand about how much to throw. And you see that school bus down there in the bottom of the draw there. That's was Weiser and Payette High School came out, and we planted this area by hand on private land. So our partners, Lucky Peak Nursery, we could not do these volunteer projects without a quality supportive nursery like Lucky Peak. They've been our source of plants at Idaho Fish and Game now for at least the 25 years that Fish and Game volunteer program has been in existence. And this volunteer particularly here, he doesn't look too happy, so my guess is that it was already 100 degrees that day, and he's ready to be done. So here we are spreading sagebrush seed inside the nursery. We bring such large quantities of seed that we spread our own seed. The nursery will do this job for us, but since we have lots of volunteers, we usually bring them and spread the seed on drying racks. We also do this with sagebrush. And then the nursery propagates those seeds into seedlings, and we get outside and plant. And this was on the Pony Fire a couple years ago. You can see the stark, barren landscape. These particular volunteers come from Hope Lutheran Church, and they've been involved planting with us for about a decade now. And these volunteers come back. They only plant 1 day a year, but they come back every year, and they're getting really good at planting, and they know what they're doing. It's so cool to have volunteers that come back, because you can just hand them a big bucket of plants and say, go up on that hill and do your work, and that's what they do. And we planted 32,000 seedlings last year. On any given year, we plant between 25,000 and 60,000 plants. 1 year we did nearly 90,000, which just about killed us. And I know by contractor standards, that's not maybe the hugest numbers to do 32,000 in a year, but I will point out that volunteers, when they're instructed well, they often do a very good job, and those plants are planted with love and care, and in some cases volunteers will even come back and maintain the plants a little bit. So this is, I use this slide to kind of point out what we've done and also maybe talk about the difference between spring and fall planting. So on Sodafire, we planted 5,000 seedlings at that Cow Creek Lek in 2016. And then we did 1,500 at the Coal Mine Basin Lek this fall. And then you see some other numbers there, especially that mile marker 14. We did about 4,000 seedlings this year, and we're going to do 20,000 next spring. And the amount of effort to do those is about the same from fall to spring. And so land managers can think about that, and working with volunteers, what the amount of effort it takes to do a fall planting versus a spring planting in the Intermountain West. In the fall, the ground is hard. You have to water the plants in and oftentimes re-water depending on what the weather's doing. Whereas at least in southwest Idaho, especially on some of the hilly areas, we get pretty good precipitation in the spring most years. And so you can just pop plants in the ground like crazy without as much effort. And I will talk about our monitoring here and about how we're going to decide as the climate maybe continues to warm about what's the most beneficial as far as spring or fall plantings go. So here's some volunteers at the nursery. They're wrapping sagebrush plants, getting ready for a planting, and we actually usually do this down at our Fish and Game property in town, but in this particular case we were up at the nursery, so again it's good to have them as a partner. And this is what it looked like this fall, planting on the mile marker 14 fire. This fire burned really hot. It burned in early August, and so things were really dried out, and this site had quite a bit of cheatgrass. But we had all sorts of volunteer groups. This fall we had an ROTC group from Boise State that really came out and put a lot of plants in the ground for us. And we had HP, a local company here in Boise. We had about 8 different groups of anywhere from 10 to 25 come out. And again, that's part of that spirit of volunteerism where the company each year has their employees go out and volunteer in the community. So that was really nice of HP. Table Rock Fire, this is one particular fire burned right outside of downtown Boise, and I've never seen so much interest from any one fire that really lit the community, no pun intended, but lit the community on fire to want to do something for their landscapes. People care about Table Rock. They like to hike there. Some of their homes abut very close to that. There's deer that winter there. And everybody knew it was a problem. You see the big black scar all summer long in Boise. Fortunately, this fire did burn near the 4th of July fairly early, and it mostly burned at night. So you can see the sagebrush in the foreground didn't burn completely, and some of that sagebrush probably is dead by now. But we did notice when we were out there that much of the bitterbrush that was up on these sites didn't really burn. The fire just burned right under it. So that was nice. But at the same time, it did bring that huge community push and effort. So on our Fish and Game website, we had set up, we had some articles where people could read about fire rehab because everybody was calling. They knew some of this fire was on our Boise River Wildlife Management area. Everybody wanted to get involved, and so we worked with our state web team to come up with an easy way for people to sign up. And so right there at the end of those articles, it was just like, click here to sign up to be involved in restoration of these fires. And we had 350 new volunteer contacts just this fall, and summer and fall due to these fires. And then we got out there already this fall and started planting. You see a group there planting on the Table Rock fire. We got these plants in the ground, and the weather turned, and pretty soon it was snowing, and now, you know, we've had 2 feet of snow on that site probably since then. And I'd really like to point out, again, that niche that we feel, or we have an outlet for people that care about the community, that care about their landscape, that care about the deer that winter behind their house. We are that outlet, and at the same time, we're an outlet for them. We also get a lot of good work done for wildlife and for habitat. So it was really good this year that we were able to capitalize on that public interest, whereas if you weren't set up and had a program ready to do it, all that public interest, they say, how can we help? How can we do it? And there's nothing for them to do. So it really helps to have a program where somebody cares about what's going on and it has a way to engage people. So I'm pretty proud of our program in that aspect. And you can see volunteers are just able to get out on all sorts of hillsides where equipment can't and work in pretty dramatic landscapes. And this was a really memorable day. Volunteers still talk about how pretty that day was. So then some of our results from what we're doing, I just want to highlight a few things, kind of new things we're doing too. We're out there monitoring plants now. We've got 650 seedlings monitored this last year. So we're taking a subset of our population out there. And then we're also comparing protected versus unprotected plants from browsing, because in some areas the mule deer really hit plants hard. And we want to see if it really makes a difference, if it's worth putting those Vexar plant tubes on there or not. And so far, I guess I can't really say so far if it's beneficial enough to do it, but I have seen photos of plants that were protected that are these already like a basketball size after one growing season. So volunteers are also really good at finding plants. And then this is my dog. I have to showcase her because she's getting old, won't be around that much longer, but this is in 2009, planting on Spring Shores just above Lucky Peak Reservoir. So that was one growing season after planting. And then here's 2012, the same slope, not the exact same spot, but I wanted to show how big some of those plants can get. So we do photo monitoring too, especially on some of our riparian sites, but I've been trying to incorporate more photo monitoring into our sagebrush and bitterbrush restoration as well. And then this is a really awesome plant. After one growing season, it's putting up these 2 football goal posts of sagebrush seed. So pretty excited about that. So here's some numbers, and volunteers actually helped us calculate these numbers. We had a volunteer come in last summer and enter data for us, which was really helpful. So again, volunteers are involved in all aspects of the project. At that Cow Creek Lex site after one growing season, we had pretty good bitterbrush survival, 64%, and that was after we had good winter moisture, but our summer was about as dry as I've ever seen a summer here. We had almost no monsoonal moisture. It was a slightly cooler summer because of that, but the humidities were down in the single digits almost every day, and my skin showed the effects of it. It was a really dry summer, so I'm pretty actually excited about these numbers. 64% bitterbrush survival. Our 16% sagebrush survival leads. We wish we had better survival, but we also seeded there too. And then our Squaw Butte site and Black Canyon site, those were a fire off of Highway 52. We had 55% bitterbrush survival at both sites, and we only planted sagebrush at Squaw Butte, not at Black Canyon. This was another example of a fire that, because of the Soda Fire, BLM decided to let that one be, and our program was able to go in and get plants on that site. So that, again, that's our little niche that we fill, where we're able to do maybe some smaller fires or some areas that are important to big game wintering and maybe not as doesn't quite get the attention that larger fires get. So, and then we have at the bottom some survival after 2 growing seasons, which we were pretty excited about after a dry spring and a dry summer. Turner Gulch, we had 30% bitterbrush survival and 66% sagebrush. And then our hilltop site was really dry when we put the plants in. It was raining a little bit. We were hoping for more spring moisture, and it just never happened. So you can see bitterbrush survival wasn't great, but I'm actually pretty excited about that 28% sagebrush survival at that site. And volunteers, again, are helping out there on the hill and helping to calculate these. So kind of some new things on the horizon. Fishing Game is going to be doing more cheatgrass treatments with the Mazepec and some of those bacteria strains that we've already done some tests with. BLM is also moving in that direction, and if you saw some of those photos earlier, you probably know that cheatgrass treatments might be very beneficial before we plant. We're targeting probably about 35,000 seedlings this year. And then, again, we're going to be working more on those survival rates of the fall versus spring plantings to see This year we're having really good snowpack. We'll see what the summer does for us as far as how dry it is. And the trend since I've worked here has been summers hit earlier, it's lasted longer, falls are getting really long and dry. So we'll see. It seems to me like our spring planting window is getting smaller and shorter, and we might be into almost all fall planting in another decade, just depending on what the weather does. And then again, we've got Boise State University Service Learning Orientation starting today. This is a big, nice chunk of our volunteers that come back, or they have to come out on multiple projects so they really learn what's going on, and I just think it's kind of exciting. They're starting today, and we've got a few more coming up in the next week or two. And this is my last slide, but I wanted to mention too, as far as signing up, so there's my contact information if you'd like to call and talk more about this or email. But also, we use Google Forms and Google Docs to get volunteers to sign up, and this has been a huge help as far as recruiting volunteers and getting the information out. I used to spend, back in 2005, I probably spent, in the springtime, I spent the majority of my day as the part-time volunteer coordinator just emailing back and forth with volunteers about the spring planting season. And now we've got this great Google free program for us, and I can have all that information out in just a few minutes and have a little bit of correspondence with volunteers and spend 1 hour in a day versus 8 hours communicating with volunteers, so that really helps. And that's really what I've got to showcase today. Thanks a lot for having me, and at this time, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you so much, Michael. All right, so if you have any questions for Michael, please type your questions into your questions box in your control panel. The first question, first a comment from Steve Popovich. Truly impressive volunteer stats. Have you ever had any issues with over-reliance on volunteers taking on mission-critical restoration activities and then accomplishments not coming through if the volunteers fail to work out on the project?
Yeah, that does seem to be a concern from other people in our agency too. And typically, I think maybe you saw on the way we work this program is that we do have volunteers involved in all aspects, but I also have it safeguarded that we can get the project done, or like I said, sometimes we might have leftover plants or something where we have to kind of scramble to get them in the ground. But as far as what you mean by those mission critical things, like in order for some of these projects to happen, I have to have drivers. And so like you see in this last photo here, I've got a few fishing game trucks right there in the front. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that I have, because even our best volunteers, every once in a while get sick or something, most of those are really good about coming and making sure that they are at the site when you need them, even if they're sick. But once in a while it happens where someone gets sick at the last minute. And so the ways I combat that is I'll use the best volunteers for those most mission critical things to happen. And then two, I'll have a little backup. So a lot of times we'll meet in one location to grab vehicles and then go meet volunteers at another. And when I'm meeting at that first location, I'll make sure I have an extra person come or an extra two just in case. So yes, there can be problems, but if you find the right volunteers, you can really avoid those issues. We've had volunteers, go out and collect trail cameras, and we've had volunteers, I don't know, they've hauled carcasses across the state, and they've transported live animals like black bears for rehab, and all sorts of stuff volunteers are doing besides habitat. And again, some staff are really hesitant to use those volunteers, and I just make sure I find the right one to make sure that those mission critical things don't fail, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks. I have a question. So it sounds like you just recently started your monitoring, but your project has been going on for about 25 years. Do you have any stats on your long-term success rates?
So the monitoring really ramped up a couple years ago when some kind of changes within the program happened in ways that I wanted to take the program. But what we have is we have photos from past projects, and we have I guess you could call it anecdotal. so
Mm-hmm.
so we have a whole like report compiled of where we planted and how many plants, and we can track those sites and you can go look at them, but as far as actual numbers, it's basically up to your eyes and the camera um, to what those other years of monitoring looks like, or of success looks like.
Could you anecdotally, like on the top of your head,
Yeah,
how, like, I guess how many like epic failures have you had, or how many like epic successes?
right, yeah. And that's, of course, I'm a glasses half full kind of guy, so take that with a grain of salt. But um, I would say that we have very few that I would call epic failures where you go to a site and you're just like, oh my gosh, there's no plants here. So
Mm-hmm.
that's good. I would say earlier in my career, those earlier sites, back when we were getting good spring moisture, and we would just anecdotally say we must have had 80% survive here, and that's a really common way I would have described projects. Was heck yeah, that was 75% survival after 5 years. And but again, I don't have hard numbers to back that up. I just have my eyes and remembering where we put what. So yeah, I would say the only other real epic failure that's happened, besides maybe just one or two sites where you go back and it's like, oh my gosh, there's nothing that grew here, but is reburns. We didn't have those for a number of years, and then just in the last couple of years, we've been reburning sites, which has helped steer us to wanting to do more cheatgrass control, as well as where Highway 21 bisects our Boise River Wildlife Management Area. A lot of push in Fish and Game is to maybe green strip or brown strip that highway, because we're tired of all the many vehicle starts that happen there. So, did I
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you. When you're working with these volunteers, what kind of, I guess, like paperwork or legal issues do you have to deal with? Do people just fill out volunteer forms for like a whole summer or the event? And how much training do you do? Like, do they have to have first aid training? And you said a lot of them know their plants really well. Do you do plant identification training?
Well, some of them have learned plants just by coming out with
Mm-hmm.
us on projects, and others come from those walks of life, like the Native Plant Society or something, where they're already involved, and that's how they get involved with us, is that they're interested in native plants, and we have, again, that outlet for them.
Okay.
But as far as paperwork, we just have a simple volunteer form that the state requires, and Idaho Fish and Game and the state of Idaho is really good with volunteers. Um, Basically, the form is just informing volunteers with a signature, that they know that they're a volunteer, they're not getting paid, and that we will provide workman's comp for injuries, and will also protect anything that they might do, like if they're using a weed eater and they throw a piece of gravel through somebody's window, for example,
Oh,
we'll
okay.
cover we'll cover that. But so they're really not signing like a waiver that says the state isn't liable for anything,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the only thing they have to fill out, and then we just require the volunteers do that once per year. Kind of like a temporary employee they fill out their temporary paperwork once per year. It's kind of the same idea. So it's fairly simple to be involved. And as far as training and safety goes, we try to talk about specific safety issues as best as possible on each project, just about where the bathrooms are, where to find me if there's a problem, what to do with a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that's growing in the state of Idaho, is more safety conscious. So we don't have any specific like beforehand safety training.
Mm-hmm.
And then for most of these projects, they're kind of show up and serve type projects. So we have our regular crew leaders, our volunteers that know what they're doing. We'll have them take a group of people up on the hill and show them how to plant. So that is basically the training at that point, is just you're trained on site.
Great.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Okay, next question. Please clarify how 100 volunteers in 2 days collected 1,000 pounds of sagebrush on Sodafire. That is a heck of a lot of seed. 1,000 bulk pounds? Wow.
Yeah, all right. Well, of course somebody would have to question me on my numbers, but I actually, since I saw that question beforehand now, or had some time to look at that question, I did notice that there was actually a third day. So that was 3 days with about 100 volunteers each of those 3 days. So that would be 300 volunteers roughly, or almost 300. 275, I think, is what it came out to. And so, and then that is how we collected about 1,000 bulk pounds over 3 days of collecting Wyoming sagebrush. So
Okay.
yes, we're awesome. Volunteers are great, and that's to get that much seed requires each bucket is about 5 pounds of seed when we're collecting with those 5-gallon buckets, and so that requires 200 buckets full to get 1,000 pounds. So it's
Wow,
possible.
that
Yeah.
is great. Cool, thanks. Okay, next,
Yeah.
have you had weed contaminant issues at Lucky RE seed plantings increase? This has been quite a recurring critical issue for my program with Lucky over the last 12 years, regardless of Lucky's repeated attempts to address.
Right, and I assume they're talking about bare root. I mean, they could be talking about containers as well. But as far as bare root goes, we actually, like I showed that slide of people wrapping those seedlings, so we kind of go through and do our own kind of quality control and wrapping. And so if there are any weeds, we catch them, but really the weeds have been very few in my experience with bare root. And if there are weeds, we just pull them out. Or if we miss them, I mean, honestly, where the sites we plant on already have, I think, every weed the Lucky Peak Nursery would have to, so it hasn't really been hasn't been an issue for our program.
Okay, great, thanks. Next one is a comment. FYI, some unbrowsed Kapuka Bitterbrush morphs on BLM and Craters of the Moon is columnar and 12 feet tall. Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome. We've got some that big over by Boise, and I know that what turned me on to even the idea of these big plants was reading a book called Wild Trees of Idaho by Frederick Johnson from the U of I, and he said they were interested in any more large wild trees that are bitterbrush or sagebrush that fit tree description. It sounds like those are close, so that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is impressive. All right, next one. Looks like you are only using Lucky for greenhouse shrub grow-outs and seed cleaning, not seed or bare root field increases, so guessing no weed issues for you.
Right. Actually, we're using them mostly for bare root. Our container plants, that if you saw any in those slides, came from the Sagebrush and Prisons project. So most of our plants from Lucky are the field run, or excuse me, the out in the field bare root plants. So again, I kind of addressed that weed issue there, and yeah, we're not doing any seed increases though, like that, no.
Okay, thanks. This is just a comment regarding the slide, I think, about having the tube medium to prevent browsing, and the questioner said we found that tube medium does not stop browsing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if they mean like in the long term. I wish I had a picture I could show you where the tubes we had these large plants inside tubes, and then things were munched down to an inch tall that were outside the tubes. So it certainly helped at our Cow Creek site on the Sodafire this last year, but that doesn't mean it helps with long-term browsing at all. I don't know.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a comment, you guys are doing very good stuff. Keep it up. Thanks for your good PowerPoint.
Thanks.
Next question, thoughts on the role of mycorrhizae and biological soil crusts in the restoration process?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mycorrhizae is something I would like to incorporate more into our projects. We worked with Bill Davidson. Some of you might know who he is. He works for USGS now. He was a grad student at Boise State, and we ended up helping him, supplying some equipment and helping with some plantings where he was doing some mycorrhizal testing. And without speaking too much for Bill, I would say that he thinks that we could get better survival rates if we could inoculate in mycorrhizae before we planted our seedlings, and that would be great if we could find a way to make that really easy and practical to do. And that could be, it could be a reason why we noticed that when we're doing restoration, if the site had sagebrush on it before the fire, it's likely to be able to accept and grow sagebrush again. If the site has been converted grassland for a long time, trying to get sagebrush to grow in those sites is really hard, and that probably has to do with grass competition too. But it could be that mycorrhizae is a big part of that, and I'd certainly be willing to explore that more if people have good ideas there. And then as far as biological crusts go, that's kind of along those same lines. We've noticed that sites that have biological crusts, we're able to get in there and disturb minimally and get plants established. And if biological crusts are not present, we typically have completely converted understory of cheatgrass. And again, those situations are harder to establish. So I don't know how to reestablish biological crust, but we certainly have seen big differences in our restoration sites if the site has a crust on it or if it doesn't.
Okay, great, thank you. Last question. Thanks for a great presentation, Michael. Just to let you know, the Snake River Birds of Prey NCA Wyoming Big Sagebrush you collected and helped to plant have in several sites a 45 to 65% survivorship after 2 years with fall planting. Thanks again.
Yeah, and that's great. I didn't know those exact numbers. That's from Anna Halford, I'm sure. And those are great numbers. And Anna has been a huge supporter of this and the reason why this project really has been so successful. And we've done a lot of plantings with her on the Snake River Birds of Prey. You might have noticed in one slide we had Sage International collecting that Wyoming source, although they were on a basin plant, I think, at that moment in that photo. But yeah, we did all sorts of plantings on the South Sim fire, the Bigfoot burn fire, and are always pleased to see that good work's getting done out on BLM ground too. So thanks a lot, Anna. If anybody out there is interested in this kind of thing or wants to learn more, please feel free to contact me. I'd be more than happy to talk to you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, thank you all for your participation. I will post the recording of this webinar on our Great Basin Fire Science YouTube channel this afternoon, and the link will be automatically sent to you through the GoToWebinar system tomorrow. If you have further questions regarding this or future webinars, please email or call me anytime, and Michael said you could contact him too. So again, thank you for attending, and thank you so much, Michael, for your presentation.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, we appreciate it too. All right.
Okay.
Well, have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.